I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. One of the most beautiful things about life surely has to be some of the randomness to it all. I mean, careers and all they represent sort of fit into this idea to a degree, whether we're talking initial pathways into a profession or the experiences one has along the way within their chosen line of work. Take our guest today. He's a person you'll soon meet who, yes, had a deep passion for sound, composition, and all things music from a young age. Little did he know that a magical concoction of serendipity, network connections, and just a flat-out thirst for more would lead him to one of the most recognizable children's programs on the planet. Yeah, Sesame Street. There he would go on to musically working with talented performers like John Legend, Usher, Jason Mraz, and others, as well as Muppet performers of characters we all know and love like the Cookie Monster, the Count, Big Bird, Elmo, Abby Cadabby, and others. Well, on today's episode, we're going to dive into his work, which I might add extends outside the world of Sesame Street, and hear more about his amazing career, more in the way how he made it to the top and what he's learned along the way, advice to others who want a professional musical career, and a few other topics of conversation. So let me quickly introduce him to you a little more formally, and we can do this. Paul Rudolph is a musician, composer, arranger, music director, 3-time Emmy Award-winning music editor, and instrument builder. Now, much of his work has been done on a little show a few of you might be familiar with, Sesame Street. There, Paul has been nominated multiple times for an Emmy in music direction, and from 2016 to 2018, he captured 3 consecutive Emmys for sound editing. And since 2008, he's been the vocal music director at Sesame Street, and has been part of this powerhouse program which continues to capture major awards and praise. And in that role, Paul is no stranger to working with global superstars during musical guest appearances, including the likes of Bruno Mars, Jimmy Fallon, Usher, and even the US Marine Corps Band. Further, his work is also comprised of composing music for Sesame Street, Sesame Place live shows, games, apps, voiceovers, as well as the recording of Muppet character and guest vocals. And finally, Paul also music directs live performances. Now, outside of Sesame Street, he's musically active on many other fronts too. Many of his original compositions have been featured on Netflix, Amazon Prime, National Geographic programs, and in film. And as a percussionist and instrument builder, his unique found object instruments have been featured in film, Super Bowl ads, and other commercial work. His percussion performance art group, Glank, has been entertaining audiences of all ages since its formation in 2002. Now, education-wise, Paul attended the University of Illinois, where he received a bachelor's degree in music education and a master's in music composition. So, with all of this noted, I'd love to welcome you to my conversation with Paul Rudolph. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. You know, really looking forward to this conversation. I mean, your background kind of speaks for itself. And I couldn't be more thrilled to get into all of this with you today. With that in mind, I do have this first segment lined up. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my listeners know, it's a segment where I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest does. Now, surprise, surprise, I did go with music director for you. And a bit of a surprise in that Wikipedia didn't have an entry for this. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So I did kind of work around this by going to the job site Indeed and found something there, and maybe we can go with that. So let me just read that off, and then you can comment after. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. So here we go. Music director. A music director is a professional who prepares and leads music groups, such as bands or choirs, for live performances or recording sessions. They hold auditions to find the right musicians, select the songs the musicians play, offer musical training, and provide feedback to help musicians improve. A sampling of responsibilities include selecting musical arrangements and compositions, adjusting music compositions to the musicians and style of performance, attending creative meetings with other executives. There we go. There we go. I'm really
Wow.
curious to hear what your take is on all of that.
There's definitely a percentage of that I do every day as a music director. It's less about, I mean, as far as like auditioning goes, I never audition anyone. As a music director for what I do specifically for Sesame Street and for other shows, the cast is definitely already there. They're already chosen years, potentially decades before, especially with a long running show like Sesame Street. But it's for me, it's all about preparing the talent to record or perform vocally. That's pretty much my definition of it. Because you can add to the, for me, vocal music director is very specific to what I do for Sesame Street. But I'm also, I wear different hats. As a music director for Sesame Street, I would consider that the live shows where I'm working with the performers and I'm getting them up to speed on whether it's a classic song that Sesame Street's done, or we're doing a new arrangement of it, or some new harmonies. I'll work with them and rehearse that. I consider that's in a broad sense a music director, but I'm dealing with them specifically vocally on Sesame Street, like when I'm recording them, pre-recording them for the show. And so I'm also a music teacher. I mean, I think that's part of the job. It's inherent to what I do, is helping a performer learn a new song. I mean, that's the basic ABC of it, is like, here's a new song, here's a lead sheet. If you want to use a lead sheet, if you want to use the script and just look at lyrics, the Sesame Street cast, they have a varied set of skills between all of them. Some of them have a music background, some of them don't. Some of them are just born natural singers. And the biggest variable that's not included in that definition is character voices. Like, as a music director, I'm listening to character voices all day. So I'm not listening to, if you were to sing as a tenor, maybe your range is here as a tenor, but maybe your vocal range as that cast member, as that performer, is like a little bit less than that or wider than that. You might think of yourself as a tenor, but you might be humorously singing as an alto or a soprano, even like just silliness, falsetto. So I'm listening to those sounds every day because I'm also judging where I put the keys of songs for where the performer is most comfortable. So that gets into almost microscopic versions of what a music director does, because I'm helping that performer sing in character and staying in that range. And right when I got to Sesame Street, I was gifted the vocal range chart for all the characters that my predecessor, Dave Conner, gave to me. He was on the show for decades, I think almost maybe 30 years. And he had this whole list of the characters and their ranges, which is fascinating to look at, because again, you think of a person like a male or female. Okay, that person is a tenor, that person's an alto, but here's their character range. And I have to stay within that range, because if you're singing too high, it can sound strained and painful. Or if you're too low, it gets out of character either way. If you go too high or too low, it can get out of character. So yeah, that's a good definition of music director. There's a bunch of additions and subtractions, I think, for me.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me in just what you're communicating there is the fact that I think, working for a company like, Sesame Workshops or Sesame Street itself, it's an institution, right? I mean, they have their standards and they have their ways of doing things. And I guess the way that you just communicated these ideas across is the expectations fall within, for example, these ranges, or this is what we want, this is what we need. And I'm guessing that part of your job is, when, of course, like you just mentioned, working with the cast and making sure that their sound is consistent, but then also working with guests who are coming on the program and letting them know, or working behind the scenes to ensure that they're falling within the parameters of what the show knows works, if this makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and with guests, they choose the key for whatever song they're singing, because that's their song. Like if a guest celebrity singer comes on, we will then arrange our vocals around them. So even if we're doing a classic song like Sing or Welcome to the Party or whatever, we will tailor it to that guest. If we're doing an original Sesame Street song for that guest, then our head music director and arranger, well, Bill Sherman's our head music director, our arranger Joe Feidler, they will kind of pick that key for that person, and they will basically arrange around that person or compose around that person. And I'm a composer as well. That's one of the other hats I wear on the show. And there's a dozen or so composers that write for the show. So when we are thinking about characters, I'm thinking as a composer what works best, even rhythmically for certain characters that will be singing. But a lot of what I do happens upstream. So if I'm working if I see a script come in with lyrics on it, that has upstream from me, that has been gone through in different versions. And what's the curriculum for the show? What is the lesson we're teaching? It could be happiness. It could be working together. It could be sharing. It could be any number of things. By the time it gets to me, those lyrics are all pretty much sorted out. And then I'm thinking about rhythm and how poetically the lyrics work together, and then applying it to the characters. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think when I tell people that, especially character voices, people think, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense," because Elmo is a male tenor, but he sings in falsetto. My wife, Abby Cadabby, she has a very wide range. She does multiple characters, including Elmo's puppy Tango, which I could say Tango sings in character, but she's a natural alto, but she can sing as a soprano too in character. So. Yeah, it's really fun to dive into that. I don't consider myself a vocal coach or a vocal teacher in that I'm not helping them with the craft of singing in character. In other words, finding the muscle that works right for a character. That is something that they've already established that before they walk in my door in the studio to sing, right? So I might say, well, it's a little high there. Can you sing a little lighter? You know what I mean? I'll just throw that out there. And that's super generic terminology for a singer, but as long as that's kind of in their brain and they think about not pushing it too hard in a higher range, that can help them. But yeah, I'm not saying do these exercises and go la 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 la. I'm not doing that. For me to tell that to the performer of Cookie Monster, like I don't know how he gets that gravel in his voice. I couldn't, and it's not an easy thing to do. I can't tell him, here's what you should do for that to train your muscles to do that. You know what I mean? Because vocal cords are definitely muscles, and you can strain them, you can hurt them, you can improve them. And I think Pavarotti said it, if I rest, I rust. So, if you're not working that muscle all the time, just the other day I was working on a demo for the Macy's parade, and my voice is a little not in shape. And I worked on the demo for 2 hours, and I'm like, wow, I'm hoarse.
Yeah.
It's a muscle for sure.
Well, it sounds like, again, I think return to this word of consistency, right? You're seeking that in the character voices and the ranges that they should be falling within, and just ensuring that quality is there, right? Maybe for lack of a better word.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the legacy of Sesame Street too. Whenever I'm composing, I'm always kind of looking to the past. I always like to kind of go on YouTube or Muppet Wiki and find fun old songs that might relate to something I'm doing. When I was a kid, I remember Simon Soundman, which our amazing sound effects guy, Dick Maitland, who's been on the show since season 1. He's been on the show for 55 years. He did all these great sound effects in real time. And if you don't, I won't even give it away, but look up Simon Soundman Sesame Street, and you'll see these great sketches where a person is talking, but sounds are coming out of their mouths, right? And they're sound effects. So that's all I'll say. But just watch that and realize that our sound effects guy, Dick Maitland, is doing that stuff live. He's making that stuff happen live. So, and then of course we had, Joe Raposo was the first music director composer for the show. He wrote thousands of songs for the show, including legendary stuff like Being Green. And so that's the bar that's set, I think, for all the composers to say, okay, what would Joe Raposo do? He wrote beautifully complex jazz songs that still sound singable and are hooks to sing along with. And I think it says a lot about the early DNA of the show, with Joan Gans Cooney and Lloyd Morissette starting the show from an advertising point of view, which if you know the history, that Joan Gans Cooney knew a lot of people on Madison Avenue. She got a lot of pros in from the ad world to work on the show early on because she and others that she was working with discovered that kids were memorizing, jingles off commercials, like beer commercials. She's quoted as saying this. She's like, look, if they're memorizing that, let's make this a magazine show where you turn the page and there's a little jingle that's talking about ABCs or 1, 2, 3. And all of a sudden you're learning but you're learning it singing it, or with humor. I mean, humor, I think, is a big part of it too. So when I'm composing, I'm always thinking, what would Joe Raposo do in terms of something clever? It's not just a nursery rhyme. It's something different than just a sing-along nursery rhyme for us. So.
Yeah. No, I like that insight there. And I'd love to add to this a little bit here by this other segment, a day in the life. Maybe you could share a little bit, what a typical day or maybe a week looks like for you.
Yeah, well, it's not a full-time job. It's a it's a very up and down freelance job, which every job I've been doing for the last 26 years has been. I started off, honestly, 30 years ago as a band director. I was a true music teacher in the public schools in Illinois. And then I had this calling to expand my parameters of music, and I moved to LA and got into film and TV stuff with different composers. So a day in the life on Sesame Street, if we're in the studio and we're actually filming the show, it's a solid 10 or 12-hour day of me pre-recording voices for a song that might be happening that day or next day or the day after. I am editing those vocals. I'm tweaking pitch and rhythm and things and just lining things up. Our performers are amazing, but it does take a little bit of editing just to kind of, if I've got 12 vocalists and they're all singing in character, I want those cutoffs to be right. I want the rhythms to be right. Again, that's the bar that was set. Although if you go way back and you listen to some stuff from the 70s, there's some pretty loose vocals going on, which I love because it's real. And I think our ears have really changed in the last 20 years or so with digital, because you can fix that rhythm that's just slightly off and be like, bang, those rhythms are all together. So it doesn't matter how old you are, your ears are now in tune with the digital audio and digital music that's happening today. So anyway, that's two parts of what I do. Vocalist comes into my office, I record them, I edit them. I get a rough mix basically ready for the stage, and I'll send that to the director. I'll send that to my wonderful A2 who does playback on the show, send it to the head music director, make sure, everybody's okay with a rough mix. Send it to the performers, of course, so they can practice their lip syncing to the song. And then we basically deliver that song to the set. And Chris Cesano's an amazing A2. He does all the playback for us. So I'm on set with a headset. I'm communicating to him. I'm basically conducting the performers as they lip sync, which is very loose for me. I try not to be distracting because a puppeteer has a lot going on. They are in a sometimes a very awkward position. They're looking at a monitor, which is the same shot that you see when it goes to air. It's left is right and right is left, so it's backwards. So they've got a lot to think about. There might be a basketball that's thrown into the shot that they have to think about catching while they're singing or whatever. So I'm literally on the floor, kind of within peripheral vision of them. And I'm basically just kind of giving them ins and outs. I'm not sitting there going 1, 2, 3, if we're like a drum major. I'm basically kind of helping them with a cutoff or an entrance or giving a 4, 3, 2, 1 to start. For me, that's the best seat in the house because I've pre-recorded all the music. I've seen the script go through verse changes and such. Now this is it. This is what people will see and hear. So me watching that all come together is fascinating because I'm watching these performers who, I have a lot of respect for these puppeteers and performers. They consider themselves, the moniker they use now is Muppet performer. Because they get this a lot. My wife gets this all the time. Oh, do you do the voice? When you say you're a puppeteer on Sesame Street or a Muppeteer, people sometimes equate it with like animation. Like, wait, are you the voice? Are you? And they're like, no, we're the Muppet performer. So they are actors, they are singers, they are humorists. They all come from different backgrounds. My wife has a very extensive theater background. So she was in Sweeney Todd. My wife was the beggar woman in Sweeney Todd before she was ever a puppeteer. So, they all come at it from different angles, but they embody the character, and whether or not, we're at a point now where cast members and puppeteers have passed away. This is a point now, we're 55 years.
Yeah.
We lost Jerry Nelson in 2012, and that he was the Count and many, many other characters, Mr. Johnson, all these, et cetera. Matt Vogel has taken over some of those characters. Carol Spinney passed away. He was Big Bird and Oscar. Matt Vogel has taken on Big Bird. Eric Jacobson has taken on Oscar. So they are gifted or legacied those characters. They had worked with those cast members prior to a little bit extensively on puppeteering and the voice, et cetera. So yeah, it's fascinating to see that too, see a transition from performer to performer.
Yeah, it must make your job interesting as well, during that
Yeah,
time, to
yeah,
again, consistency, right? Ensuring
right.
that individual is within the ranges of what would be
Sure.
expected,
Yeah.
right?
And they bring themselves to the character too, but they're filling the shoes of that performer, which is fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that insight there. I'd like to return to a point that you did bring up earlier in the conversation here, which is relating to your pathway of getting into the business itself. You'd mentioned that you'd been in high schools and teaching there, and then made your way to LA and got into the world of entertainment. Maybe you could share a little bit of how you made your way to this point in your career, because I think for a lot of young
Yeah.
people who are interested in music, they have a tough time bridging that chasm between, okay, this is my passion, music, and then finding a professional outlet for that outside of, say, working within a high school teaching. Like there's several opportunities, but, all the same.
For what it's worth, I was raised 9 to 5 thinking, okay, I'm going to get a music education degree. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to retire in 35 years. And that was my main focus for sure. I did that, and I miss it. I mean, I really do miss that part of it, because teaching is super rewarding, to take a skill level and bring it higher and higher. And whether that's with a marching band, I did a lot of marching band in Illinois. I did a lot of drumline stuff. I love that stuff. I really did. What I discovered though when I was teaching is I was doing a lot of arranging for the marching band and the drumline. So I discovered that, and I kind of had this passion in me from when I was in college working on my music ed degree. I worked with some great like music theory teachers that were great composers, and I would play percussion on their compositions. One in particular, Zach Browning, was one of my instructors in college, and he wrote some really cool minimalist stuff. I loved his patterns and all this just cool rhythm. And so as I was in college and kind of writing some stuff, and then as I was a teacher writing more stuff, I was just inspired to do more of that. And I'd always had this in the back of my mind, film scoring, TV music. And I had a good friend that had moved to LA, and she was working for an agent that dealt with film composers, film and TV composers. And you talk about one person making a difference. And I think this is something that any young person or person choosing any path should really adhere to, is if one person makes this suggestion that you are kind of questioning, well, think about it a little harder, because that one person might make a huge difference in your career. And this good friend of mine did. So my idea then was, when she said, you need to come out to LA, just get out here. I can try and, connect you with a composer that you could then work for in their studio. And I wanted to hone my own skills as a composer, because I was just like, well, I think I can do that. I mean, I had a 4-track cassette recorder and I was making up music, but for me, I had this academic thing in my brain. Like I need to know who I am as a composer. And there's definitely two worlds. There's the kind of academia world and there's the commercial world. And I kind of felt like I was somewhere in between. When I mean academia, that's, you get a master's in composition, you get a PhD, you work on commissions for a piece, or you enter competitions, and I know that music and that sound, and I had played on percussion pieces. It's no disrespect, but it's out there. It's out there music. It's not something that you're going to hum on the way home from
Right.
Sweeney Todd or Broadway show or something. And I had a lot of respect for those composers, because I heard some really unique things that they did. And a lot of it was computer generated stuff early on in the 90s, and analog to digital kind of stuff as it was taking shape. So I went back to school, worked on my master's, just to kind of say, I want to be able to focus on my sound and say, who am I? What is my passion in this world? Because film composers and TV composers, they can be arrangers in a sense, because they're shaping an emotion and a sound. But in the commercial world, if a producer or director says, hey, make it sound like Santana, then you either have to add your own little tweak to it, or you make it sound like Santana. And you look at, how did Santana arrange this song? And here's the rhythm section, and here's the horn, or whatever that may be. So my focus was obviously percussion, and I had two great instructors. I went back and studied with Zach Browning, who was my theory professor as an undergrad. He became my composition professor. and studied with him for a year and had some great fun just writing some music. I did a master's recital with mostly percussion. The final piece I did, I walked the entire audience into a parking garage, which had like a 10-second echo. And I did this bombastic percussion piece, which was called Glank, which then became my percussion group later, with a lot of found object instruments. We even used like air vents in the parking garage and pipes and things. So I think that really helped me focus. So not that everybody has that opportunity to say, I'm going to go back to school and do this. The World Wide Web didn't exist when I was in this world. So the kids today, they have so many opportunities to connect and learn just watching YouTube videos or collaborating with someone half a world away on a piece that they're inspired by. They might be inspired by a Japanese musician and say, ooh, I'd love to try something on acoustic guitar, and then hand it over to someone playing some, ethnic instrument that adds to that. So that's what I would encourage, young people to do is do that. I'm on a tangent, aren't I? So when I moved to LA, sure enough, my friend connected me with a composer, Richard Gibbs, who became my mentor as one of the first, film composers that I worked with. He and I worked on a couple projects before he got the call to be the music director on Muppets Tonight, which is where I met my bride, Leslie, who was puppeteering on that. And Muppets Tonight was kind of Muppet Show 2.0. It was 95, 96. This is pre-streaming, of course. This is when you had big networks like ABC, and they were promoting us, and we lasted a season and a half. But we did some great, great work. We had Prince on that show. We had Tony Bennett on that show. I mean, amazing list of performers. Right. I got to sit down at a drum set when Little Richard was on, and I played drums with Little Richard for about 45 seconds, and my head exploded. So that foray into that world, obviously so different than teaching a marching band, but a lot of the same principles applied. And I think the one thing I learned a lot about, I worked with a pair of commercial composers for over 10 years, Trivers Myers Music, John Trivers and Liz Myers, husband and wife composing team, prolific composers, met on Broadway in the 70s. I think they met playing Grease. They were in the Grease pit, and then moved to LA and became these wonderful commercial composers who could really write in a multitude of styles. I learned a lot from them just watching them in a studio working with musicians, singers, guitarists, drummers, whatever, on, these are pros that they're hiring to come in and play. But even dealing with pros, amateurs alike, you want them comfortable in the studio, like comfortable with a pair of headphones on, comfortable against the mic, comfortable reading a lead sheet or a rough sketch of a music idea. And so this weird path to Sesame Street, I think, started with my DNA of being a music teacher. And I'm kind of doing the same thing with a performer, whether it's Big Bird or Abby Kadavi or The Count. I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm making them comfortable singing this song, wherever that may be in their range or whatever complex rhythm that they have to do in character, thinking about lip sync. It's kind of part and parcel of the same thing. So I think that's how I got to Sesame Street. I might have left out a few.
Yeah. Well, I like how you opened it up with that advice that somebody gives you and, thinking about something, an idea, and then maybe taking a chance, and
right.
taking a step forward in some respect. And then it sounds like to me, like you'd meet people along the way that were instrumental in teaching you other things, and then also walking through a few other open doors, probably through introductions of those individuals. And then it just starts to snowball from there, and things just kind of naturally evolve.
Yeah.
But it does begin with just having this willingness to, take a chance, take a step forward through a door that you don't know exactly where it's going to lead to.
Yeah. Well, and especially the confidence to do that. And I think that's one thing that my friend gave me was that she had heard some of my weird compositions and such. And she's like, there's something there. So having that push, like you say, is really helpful. And again, I was so 9 to 5, I'm going to be a teacher. This is my career. That I'm like, how do people go from job to job out there in California and Hollywood? The freelance world to me was scary for one thing, because you have to make those connections, and just knowing one composer wasn't enough. Even after Muppets Tonight, when we were done with Muppets Tonight, Richard Gibbs was slow at the time, so he didn't have any work for me. So I was out scrambling for work and driving a limo in between, working odd jobs that I had to pay the bills. But I think with that experience, you can get in those doors too and just say, look, here's what I've done. Willingness is one thing to work very hard. It's funny, in LA, people have this feel about people from the Midwest. Oh, you're from the Midwest. Oh, you must know how to work hard, you know. And I don't know what that means about Californians, but
Yeah,
I think they work just as hard. But maybe it's, you know, they want more time at the beach or in the mountains. I don't know.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it worked for me. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of accomplishment, maybe we could step into yet another segment of Q&A discovery. And something I mentioned off the top, I mean, you and your career has been filled with, accomplishment, certainly interesting experiences along the way. But again, returning to that point of accomplishment, 3 straight Emmy Awards for sound editing. Now, I'd love to know what you feel went into that, like versus say like other points in your career where maybe you're putting out good quality compositions or you're doing great work, but it wasn't garnering that type of accolade. What really set those years apart, do you think?
yeah, well, the Emmys are super important to me because your peers are voting for those. So the people that work in the business, I'm not a member, so I'm not actually voting, but I have good friends that are. My friend Chris Cesano, who works with Dick Maitland and sound effects and A2 and all that. They listen to other people's work and they vote on those projects. So the fact that your peers are doing that versus, me as a marching band teacher, I mean, yes, we got some trophies, but you have judges looking at that. You might have 4 or 5 judges up in the box saying good, bad. So yeah, one, peers looking at your accomplishments and saying that's really good work. And that felt great. The category I'm in for that is under my music editing category. So by me taking vocals and to some extent instrumentals, although that's less of my job as a music editor, taking the vocals and making them what we always consider album worthy, because anything on YouTube lives on YouTube forever. So again, that bar that Joe Raposo set and all the performers and composers and thousands of songs before us set, we are setting that. We want to keep that bar that high. And so that even comes down to things that my peers are listening to, like the quality of the sound and, did you record that on a Neumann U87? I mean, they know this, they can hear that. So they know from the sound editing standpoint what good sound is. And within that category, as a music editor, that's why I'm in that category for editing. So I'm super proud of that. I mean, the work that goes into it for me is just hours and hours of fine tuning things, whether it's a rough stage mix, like I was saying earlier, for the director to hear, the performers to hear, making sure. I think part of it to me, the music editing to me has a nugget of music direction in it too, even though that's not technically part of the category. I've been nominated twice for music direction, along with my other music directors on the show, which is Bill Sherman and Joe Feidler. We've been nominated too. And then people get nominated for songs, for compositions, and that includes the lyricist and the composer. So haven't been nominated for that yet, but
Yeah.
life's short. It might happen. I don't know. So yeah, the music editing thing is I'm very proud of that because of the work that goes into that. It's hours and hours of work. Even for the number of episodes we create and the number of songs we create within a season, it's a ton of work. So
I bet, I bet. And that kind of leads me to this next question here is like some of the unique challenges that you must face. You've already spoken about them to a degree, just the nature of your work and being on a program like that, working with puppeteers or, what was the phrase that you used?
Muppet performers.
Yes.
Yes, Muppet
There you go.
performers. Yeah.
Yes, yes. But working with them and then trying not to distract them, like your role on a program like that is going to be much different than you holding that title working for another company, I'm guessing. So the challenges, the rewards also must sort of reflect that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. 9 times out of 10, the biggest struggle is scheduling, like timing out everything, getting enough time for people to come in the booth and record for an hour. Like that's really hard to do. Our season is very compressed in terms of the timing that we're given at the studio. And so it's also compressed in a sense where the scripts might have been written months before, the lyrics to the song might have been written months before, but there's still changes that are happening even up to the day we film that piece. There's often times where a composer, including myself, will look at lyrics and maybe take out a word or add a word because it sings a little better. And we'll run that by the producers. So there's still a lot of this nuts and bolts kind of things happening before we record. So scheduling is like the number one thing. I worked on another show called Helpsters, which was a Sesame Workshop, had a lot of involvement with that, and a lot of the same team, producers and audio tech and lighting, et cetera, was part of that show. That was a car wash of celebrities because we would have sometimes one or two a day. And we had these repeatable songs on that, and they'd have to come in the booth and sing these 3 repeatable songs. Every guest did that. So we had to know, okay, they're on set from 8 to 8 or 8 to 6 or whatever. And the producers have to tell me, okay, they've got 30 minutes here, slot you in there, but I'm in the same physical space as the A2 and the A1 recording and playing back on the show. So we're all on headphones trying to schedule this stuff. And then I was on a show called Julie's Green Room, which is Julie Andrews on a Netflix show. Scheduling was hard because literally the distance from the stage to my office was like this 5-minute walk at Grumman Studios out in Long Island. Huge, vast expanse of space. Literally physically to get from A to B would take time. So you had to add that into the day. So scheduling, always,
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean, musically, there's been specific times where we could solve a problem by just changing up whatever nuts and bolts were happening like on the day. Like there's a specific instance with John Legend came on to do a wonderful song with us. We ended up using, I think a year later on the Macy's Day Parade, called We Come Together. Beautiful song. And I'm not even sure, I think Christopher Jackson wrote that. Anyway, we'd written him the song, we'd given him the demo, but he was right in the middle of press tour for La La Land.
Yeah.
The movie that had just come out. This is back in this would have been fall of 2019. Plus, he just had an album come out produced by Quincy Jones. So he's on a press tour for that. And we get him for like an hour and a half on Sesame Street. And he was beat. He was very tired. But he wanted to play and sing live, which he'd been on the show before, sang a song with Elmo, live, piano, all this. And so while we were rehearsing the song and started doing some takes, the puppeteers had a challenge too because they had to be surrounded by this grand piano. So they had to be hidden behind this grand piano, which often has like black fabric duvetine hiding them. Very challenging for puppeteers to just come into these shots. And so I just went over to John Legend and I'm like, do you want to pre-record the piano? And he's like, can we do that? And I'm like, yes, because, and it changed everything because then he would have to be play syncing to his performance on piano, right? So we're going to pre-record the piano. He's going to now we have to switch up like headphones and all the physical things on the set. He has to have invisible in-ears, so it looks like he's playing live. He definitely still sang live, but I could see that after a couple takes, I'm like, we're probably asking him to do too much. And still, consummate pro musician. I mean, ready to take it on, but that was my suggestion. I'm like, I think we could probably do this with a pre-record. So that ended up really helping that performer on that day. But that's a one-time thing. That's never happened since. It might never happen again, but it worked, on that day.
Yeah, well, that's certainly on the side of challenge, but also on the side of reward. It must be these thrilling moments every now and then working with, performers or entertainers such as that. That must give you a little bit of a pep in your step on certain days when you're going to be working with somebody like that. But again, there must be challenges with that at times, like they have, I think you'd mentioned already that they're coming in, they're going to perform the music the way that they perform it. But then also at the same time, as we've discussed, you guys have a job to do too, and you have to ensure that you're still hitting standards and what's going to fit,
Right.
what's going to work on your program. So trying to fit their style into it all, that must present some challenges at different points, and trying to relay that information delicately, professionally.
Right. And I think some of that also happens upstream for me too, because as a composer or arranger is writing for any given celebrity musician, they're writing it in their style. So you got to be, you have to be sort of diplomatic with that because you're writing a demo that's basically kind of within their sound palette, if you will. And so that's kind of a delicate balance because you don't want to go over the top and say, you should sound like this. But you're basically saying, this is what you're going to do for us on our show, but we still want it to be your sound. From, Jason Mraz to John Batiste. And we just had, I think I can say this, Samara Joy was on. Amazing talents that come on and sing, whether it's live or pre-recorded. And then we give them the opportunity. It's 9 times out of 10, it's pre-recorded. And then we'll give them that opportunity to record on their own. Our head music director will listen in on those vocals. And again, that's all on them. If they want to add harmonies, if they want to add doubles, they can produce it any way they want. It doesn't have to be just for us, a single vocal line with a single Elmo and Big Bird and Abby with them. They can produce it any way they want. And that's fascinating for me to see too, because I'm also seeing how that celebrity singer produces their own vocals and creates a vocal track. Gwen Stefani sent us, I think, 3 stereo pair of vocals that were just amazing, like hearing her background vocals and delays and all this. Sia as well. Sia's vocals came in. I was listening to each track going, wow, listen to what she did there. So it's like an eye opener for me to hear somebody at that level deliver just not a raw vocal, but a produced vocal, and really see like, how do they approach, their sound.
Oh yeah. You must be in heaven.
Yeah.
You must be in heaven when you're working on projects like that
Yeah.
or working with people such as that. You're constantly learning. And something I've picked up on this program is like, if you can find that zone where you're immersed in a world of your own, obviously this passion that you have for music, and you're able to lose yourself in these moments continually. That's where the magic is.
Well, and we always
that's-
joke, like, if you're watching the monitor, you're watching a performance happening while we're taping, and you're like you say, you're in that zone. And we always joke, oh, I'm sorry, I was just watching TV, because you might forget to cue something, or you might forget this or that, but you're like, oh, I was just so caught up in watching TV, because that's the joke.
Right.
So
yeah, I've got one last question in this segment here, and it's a bit pie in the sky, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you feel it's been like to base a life, a profession around, the art, composition, and refinement of sound.
I mean, and I should emphasize that Sesame Street's not my only gig. I do vocal direction and composition for other projects. I think for one thing, it's networking for sure. And if I could talk to my 20-year-old self or my 29-year-old self when I moved to LA, I would emphasize more of networking. Not the schmoozing part of it, but just being able to send a resume out or send a reel out or send some demos out and say, hey, this is what I do. I think I might be good for your project. And I've had discussions with college-age students and high school students and saying that very thing. Because they have at their fingertips the digital online world, they can look on IMDb and say, okay, I loved this composer on this film. I would love to reach out to them. They can find that person on IMDb easily. Whereas for me, having that connection with the friend who was the film scoring agent, that was a foot in the door. My other foot in the door was working in studios in LA. That's how I got my 10-year gig with these commercial composers, was through Capitol Studios. My good friend Paula Salvador at Capitol knew all these different composers and arrangers and musicians coming in the door to record at Capitol. And she had learned that these 2 composers were looking for an assistant, studio assistant. And she recommended me for that job. So that's another one person through my connections and my networking that she saw what I did on Muppets Tonight, even working with musicians and the vocalists and the producers and directors on that. So she knew my skill set. And I think, the other thing I would tell young people too is to keep updated on technology, because even though we are now entrenched in the digital world, when I was in it, it was analog switching to digital. So there was a learning curve for everybody. I work in Pro Tools every day. Back in the mid to late 90s, they called it Pro Fools because it wasn't working very well. Of course, that was very early on. So now I'm 16 years on Sesame Street, that's every day I'm working in that. So keeping up on technology, keeping up on even OS updates. The computer I'm on right now is 5 years old. Definitely need a new one. But so networking, technology, keeping up on your craft and your skill set is one thing. And I think my wife says this every day to young people: what is your passion, and what's the thing that you can do just outside of that world that just still inspires you artistically? And that was something I learned too from Jerry Nelson, who was the Count and a mentor of mine. He had a bunch of original songs that I ended up music directing for him to release on a CD called Truro Daydreams, which he released in 2009. Wonderful songs, non-Sesame Street songs, not Muppet songs, some funny songs, some serious songs, some blues. He was a wonderful singer and guitarist. And he told me, because I sat down and had a chat with him about the freelance world and how Sesame was slow at times and busy at times. And he's like, find your art outside of this that you can just do and relax and have fun with and not think about that 9 to 5 bill paying part, which is hard. You know, as a freelancer, it's really hard. It's hard for me even today after doing this since I was 29. So that artistic inspiration has really anchored me, I think, to what is my craft, the vibraphone, and playing that and having fun and playing with all my toys here. You know, just keeping that in your back pocket. Like, even if it's just sketching, if it's taking a pencil out and going to Central Park and drawing a tree, well, then that's it. Great. That's your outlet. You know, you need that artistically.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it too is just it's coming down to recognizing. I'm going to use that word again that we were speaking about earlier. The zone. You find yourself in the zone and recognizing it. If you can pull yourself out of that moment just for a millisecond and realize, like, okay, this is giving me immense joy right now, and that probably is a big sort of like sign or trigger that you probably want to pursue this further. If it's not hurting anyone else, this is probably a good thing.
Indeed.
For you.
And I mean, I'm so fortunate to work a job that I absolutely love with people that are incredible and a legacy like Sesame Street and the other shows that were new shows. Just watching these people all come together and produce this product has just been incredible. Pinching myself.
Yeah, I bet. Well, maybe we could slide into yet another segment here, a water cooler story segment. And you did share something already in terms of a John Legend story, but I'm curious if you have something else for us.
So Usher came on, and he'd been on the show before. Incredible talent. I mean, all these celebrities. I'm just, again, pinching myself, going, how am I here watching these people perform? And John Batiste was one of the best because he performed with us live, and it was just incredible to see that. But anyway, Usher. Okay, so what we used to do is we used to go to LA and we would call it the celebrity car wash, and we'd do like a word of the day, and almost every hour we'd bring in a different celebrity and they would just do a quick segment, 2 or 3 minute little sketch, and then they'd leave. I got to meet Gustavo Dudamel, who's the conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. I had him sign a baton. I met him because he was there for an hour, and I'm like, I am watching this. He didn't do a song, but he did a little sketch, and I'm like, I'm watching every minute of this, and I'm going to get him to sign a baton. And he was fantastic. So we had Usher on, and again, this comes back to like writing a demo for a celebrity composer, singer, songwriter, whatever it is. It's that fine line. And so, again, upstream from me, they had sent him a demo, and I don't know exactly what the conversation was prior to. Maybe he didn't really like the sound of the demo or whatever, but we had a studio set up in this little trailer, this little portable trailer in LA, which is a company where you can rent these really nice. It's like a horse trailer. Let's be honest. It's not very big. It's not an RV, not a super fancy RV. It's a trailer that you hook up to a truck and you pull it into a parking lot. That's where we were going to record Usher. And so we brought him into the studio. There was timing was weird that day because we had other celebrities coming in and we had a couple hours with Usher. And so what I had in the booth in this little studio was we had the track, we had the instrumental track, and we had started recording the Muppet vocals, right? So I had a few of those. I had Grover in there. It was an alphabet song. It was an ABC song. And so brought him in, and I could tell like something just wasn't right. I'm like, well, let's just listen to it with a click. Let's listen to the other Muppet vocals. Maybe you'll be inspired by that. And he started listening to the Muppets, and he's like, okay, yeah. And Usher did a Grover impersonation. And which is funny and awkward at the same time. Like, we know our performers just nail that. Yeah. But when somebody tries to mimic, it's like, oh, that's funny. Yeah. But it was good. It was a decent Grover. And I was kind of laughing. And he actually recorded a little bit of that, which is probably on a hard drive somewhere. And so I go, look, what about just hand claps? Can't we just make this an a cappella thing? Forget the track for a moment. Let's just try a little bit with that, because there was singing in it for sure, but there was a lot of speak singing in it from the Muppets. Like, they would just chime in and say, the letter C is for cantaloupe or something. And I could see the wheels turning in his brain, and he started smiling, and he's like, okay, let's try that. Yeah. And he's like, well, what about, let me just do a little beatbox at the top. So he did his own little beatbox, and we kind of looped that. And so then I'm like, okay, now we're in a good place because he's having fun with this. He's smiling. This is one thing I tell performers all the time. You can hear a smile when you sing. I mean, you can hear it. And I tell that to young singers all the time. Our pros know that part and parcel. They know that. But I always kind of remind them, one more with a little more smile. And so he was laughing during takes and singing, and that really worked out. That's for me, that was like one of those, it wasn't so much a problem solver as it was like an inspirational thing, like to say, well, what about this? If you want to let's just try one with just hand claps, forget and it all worked out. It's online. It's the ABCs with Usher. It's one of my favorite little bits that we've done in the last, wow, that
There you
was,
go.
how long ago was that? 14 years ago, maybe. Anyway, yeah, that was fun. That's my water cooler story.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I love it. I love it. And again, I'm gonna bring it up for the third time here. That this word, the zone. You helped get Usher
Right.
into his zone, I guess there, and like that's kind of a unique sort of experience
and again,
unto
I
itself.
think
And
that comes from watching my mentors in studios, and again, like making a musician comfortable. And Richard Gibbs, for one. Richard Gibbs, by the way, was the keyboardist in Oingo Boingo. So he has pop music in his DNA, but also is a wonderful composer too. So I had seen him work with musicians on Muppets Tonight. I'd seen my bosses John and Liz work with performers and changing stuff on the fly. I mean, they could change an arrangement literally on the fly and take something out or add something new, and just whether it needed a lift in the song and adding a string part or a trumpet part or whatever. This for me was like, how about a cappella? And what if we just take away, because I'd heard he wasn't necessarily happy with the sound of the track in the instrumental. So if that's the case, then hey, what if we just take it away?
yeah.
That's my
Yeah,
zone.
yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And it also speaks to this point of, like having the technical skills on one side, but then the interpersonal and, handling people, dealing with people, understanding situations, and, that whole element
Yeah.
to the work. It sounds like a big part of
It
what
is,
you're involved in.
and having that barometer of like the comfort in the studio factor or comfortable with the content. Honestly, when, if a non-singer comes on and we're asking them, well, can you sing along with the group on Welcome to the Party or sing a song? Or even the Sesame Street theme. We did that for the 50th special. And for our 50th anniversary, we had every celebrity that came on, we asked them to sing a little bit of the Sesame Street theme. And so not everybody's comfortable singing. So I would sing along with them to get them comfortable. I don't consider myself a lead singer. I'm a background singer, but I'll sing along with them and kind of have fun with it. And that's a barometer that I think I've increased over the years to say, okay, as a non-musician, I mean, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I had him singing the Sesame Street theme with me. And I'm like, come on, let's sing it together, So it's a matter of getting them in a space that's like, no, you can do this. You can sing,
Yeah. 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 Absolutely fascinating. I could listen all day to you explaining all these stories and sharing it. But I do have one last segment that I would like to pop into here, being respectful of your time. And this one's a crystal ball segment. Here we're looking towards the future. And, this notion of AI, this is typically what comes up within this segment time and time again. It promises to make our lives better, workflow is more efficient. But on the other hand here, like in a world that you're living within, especially the arts, entertainment, obviously in the last couple of years, AI has been a big issue, for creative artists and within the industry as a whole. There's a lot of fear of what it could do to professions, even somebody such as yourself and the work that you're involved in. What advice would you give to a young person who's interested in maybe going down a path that you've gone down yourself and having a career much like yours or attempting to do so, but then having to deal with, this technology that is on the edge of really turning things upside down? What would you say to somebody like that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, and this is not a joke, I would say go into artistic law, become a music lawyer, copyright lawyer, artistic lawyer, and help preserve the arts. Because you hear stories all the time about certain streaming music companies that are generating stuff that composers aren't getting credit for and copying things. It's so easy to copy things in the digital world. When I was a kid, it was cassettes, and people are like, "Oh my God, you can copy the same cassette. Oh well, that's going to ruin the industry." It didn't, but it took some time. CDs, when CDs came out, you could copy those. Napster, all that stuff. There's been artistic bumps in the road for decades, but this one in particular is super, super challenging. I have to read you a quote that I just saw the other day. This is one of my favorite AI quotes. This is from, I won't be able to pronounce her last name, Joanna Maskajewska. She's on Twitter. She said, "You know what the biggest problem pushing all AI things is?" She says, "It's the wrong direction. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. That's it. That is it for me, because chat GTP, whatever it is, yes, there's going to be some way to generate something somewhere, painting, music, whatever. There was a Broadway singer who felt that, same thing I mentioned kind of about cassettes and CDs and things that we've hit in the past. He thinks, and I hope this is true, that AI artistically is going to be thought of, oh yeah, remember that back in 2024 when how we were all worried about AI and robots generating music. Oh, that was a neat fad. And I think there are fads like that do come and go, specifically with regard to copying things like that in the digital world. Photos as well. I mean, a photographer, there's so many people that have a really good camera right here, and a pro photographer is competing with that now, and they're competing with a phone that has a great camera in it. So, but this Broadway performer really felt that it will go away. It will become this fad in the arts. I say that in the arts. In other worlds, my sister works for a big corporation where the lawyers are all scared because AI can read 1,000 pages and generate a summary the way an associate lawyer or a person would, that would take them a day. It's going to take AI 5 minutes or less. But yeah, I don't know. Nobody really knows the answer to fight this stuff aside from putting parameters in place that protect us. And that's what I mean about going into law and saying, how can we protect art? I mean, it's such a weird thing to have to say that and prove that you are an artist. I mean, now it's like if I write a piece of music, now I have to say, that was me. It wasn't AI.
Right.
That's weird. Like to say with a paintbrush, no, I painted that. AI didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have to prove yourself to say, nope, I didn't copy that. That's my rhythm and my melody. I did that.
Yeah. It's an interesting time that we're living within, and it's I think we're still trying to figure out, one, the guardrails for where we're going to allow this technology to go. And every industry is trying to grapple with that, because obviously you have efficiency issues that it's going to do a great job in a fraction amount of the time. So as a corporation, money-making enterprise, why wouldn't you want that? But on the flip side, then we have people's lives here. We have people's livelihoods at stake. And and everything that goes along with that. And I think the other thing that's really interesting to me, then I don't know how it's going to go, but within the arts, I often think about whether or not, like, at some point there's going to become like the premiumization of the human experience that's been added into a project. Like that's what people are going to want to seek out. Like this was real, with the wrinkles, with the warts, like that's real. Not this,
I think that's more built into our own DNA too. I think if you hand a 6-year-old a tablet, an iPad, and they're watching that for the next 12 years, they're in a different situation than, let's say, my generation is, because we didn't grow up with that. I think what you're saying too has a lot to do with collaboration, and with musicians, live musicians. That's one thing I would encourage anybody. If you're, everybody's concerned about AI, but if you can, just get together with musicians and play and be analog. Dave Grohl is emphatic about that. He's like, get into GarageBand and be terrible for a while. Do that.
Yeah, right.
Because I think that's going to emphasize the human element within you. Or go to an art gallery and just look at paintings that were painted 100 years ago, whatever. Yeah, collaboration in music is one thing. It's harder to say that to a painter or photographer, to say, can you collaborate? But I think there's ways to figure out how to do that too, between tips for each other. There's a wonderful filmmaker on Instagram that shows all these great tips about how to do simple things to make it look like it's snowing and all this stuff. And it's not AI. It's physical stuff that you're doing with a set to make things work. And I think that might have been an outgrowth from directors and camera people collaborating together. I'm often, as a composer, you're often by yourself. So it's a very intrinsic, process for me to write a song. I don't often collaborate. I collaborate with my wife every once in a while, but she writes the lyrics amazingly. And then I kind of curtail those into a melody, or she'll write a melody and I'll kind of arrange around that. But just having that collaboration is so inspirational, because otherwise, digital is a great tool for that, of course. But yeah, I'd encourage all musicians to think analog versus digital,
Well, that might be a nice point to draw this conversation to an end here. I really enjoyed it all, though, from start to finish, Paul. It's been a true pleasure, hearing the stories, hearing
Yeah,
your insights, and I know listeners are absolutely going to love this. So thanks again for all that you shared today.
great. Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you reaching out, Christopher.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Paul and his work, you can do so via LinkedIn, his portfolio website, Glank website, and Instagram and YouTube. And for reference, I will have links for all of these sites in the show notes. And also, too, hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share to show further support. You can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And as I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have a channel there which hosts highlights from these audio conversations. And I would love that like or subscribe. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as a, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.